I am ontology development lead, one of them at the Center for Infectious Disease Genomics and One Health. And we have a great team of over 20 people involved both in the bioinformatics side of things and in data harmonization within public health, and increasingly beyond into agriculture and nutrition. And so I'll tell that story a little bit here. So various agencies we can thank for the supporting the work, and some core people I've listed in our centers, but many more to thank. So here, the beginning of the story for me was about 8 years ago. Brought in on a project to look at foodborne pathogens, and the issue was that there are many agencies involved. Here's involved in epidemiological investigations about foodborne disease outbreaks. So here's a little snippet from a form from the British Columbia CDC, interviewing people about the signs and symptoms of foodborne illness and the onset and the hospitalization, and of course forms for interviewing them about what they ate, what kind of a food it was it preserved, hot, cold, and all of this. And of course the data harmonization issue is that these foodborne outbreaks often aren't just local to some picnic. They spread across borders and provinces and internationally. So same problem being faced in terms of data harmonization across these different agencies, and yet the questions are a little bit different. So this seems like a perfect opportunity to bring ontology to bear, a more of a standardized vocabulary to help this trace forward and trace back of investigations. And that's actually how we came to Foodon initially. Handy mentioned that we used Languel, which is a food composition database vocabulary that's been around for over 30 years. It was started by the US FDA many decades ago, and it's evolved into an XML vocabulary, kind of a library science-based vocabulary for food description. And so we converted that into Foodon in the first pass, and it's made up of a variety of facets. The part of an organism, the processes involved in preserving or cooking food, the consumer group it's pitched to. All of this can be used sort of in a traditional, simple way to create a bag of terms to describe a product, and that's what Languel was designed for. So organic mashed carrot baby food has a strained consistency. It's output of sterilization by heating. It's targeted at babies, and it's made from carrots and so on. Of course, ontologies are bringing relationships into this. So that was our first move to evolve Languel, is basically to add these relationships and try to match them up as much as possible to the relations ontology. So that creates data structure, and hopefully standardized data structure that everybody in the planet can sort of agree to and start using to describe food products. But the issue, of course, in public health, One Health, harmonized health, is that food products are just a small part of the whole equation. So here's this word cloud that's sort of springing out from food and health and all the different factors, demographics, environment, agricultural processes, contamination. So how do we tackle this? Well, OBO Foundry was in a great position to handle the biomedical side of things, but now we're kind of testing the borders of this, getting out into other domains, agriculture and beyond the plant ontology and anatomy ontologies and so on. So this is what kind of triggered this whole ecosystem of ontologies that's popped up in the last 2 years, basically. Foodon came on board about 4 or 5 years ago, and then we started getting requests for all sorts of terms to fit into Foodon, and at the same time realizing there were some other startup ontologies that might be better homes for these terms. So Melissa Handel, about a year and a half ago, suggested a phone call to sort of sort out some of these possible term homes and definitions for diet and nutrition. Maxo had some requests, and others had some too. So we actually started a phone call to harmonize and synchronize the contents happening in development happening in many of these ontologies that are related to food. So it's a spectrum from the agricultural and wild food collection, harvesting, and over to food production, and then finally the consumer and what they're eating, how they're motivated to eat, how healthy they are, and the various ontologies that are collected around surveying them to see what they like to eat and how their minds work when they're in the shopping aisle, and what shows up as chemical traces in their poo and what's happening in their metabolism and all of that. So it's just an amazing explosion of content. So just running through a couple of slides, pointing out in particular some of the ontologies that are involved in this joint food ontology work group directly through monthly calls, discussing term issues and also presentations from different ontologies to keep us up to date about the news happening. Food products, of course, is Foodon's territory directly, but nutritional attributes is a big one that's come on in the last year, which is where we're going to be importing into Foodon the whole dietary nutrition hierarchy, vitamins, minerals, carbohydrates, diet and dietary patterns. This is where diet and dietary pattern terms are: Mediterranean diet, vegetarian, and so on. So we're bringing that into Foodon for an easy reference, but you can go straight to ONS for that. Nutritional epidemiology, so studies about interview forms and surveys about what people are eating and the impact on their health. We need the document structure for that. Disease, of course, directly naming the diseases, rare diseases and common allergies, and the genomic epidemiology to trace, say, foodborne pathogens. Food chemical biomarkers, I mentioned briefly, and the food-drug interaction, of course. How is what you eat also affected by the drugs and vice versa that you're taking? So then the food supply chain, we've also got some more long-standing ontologies. Agro starts in the field, processes of farming, and ecto is also focused on describing the variables that are being subject to both in organisms and plants. HSO, I think we have Fernanda Doria on here. She's the author of this animal and human health surveillance ontology, which is getting at the whole One Health mandate of looking at herd and agricultural production, contamination and reporting, as well as human clinical surveillance of disease. And then process ontology. So now we're getting into what's happening on the assembly line and agricultural processing of food, and that's of great interest to nutritionists in terms of this whole ANOVA degrees of food processing and the effect on human health. So all of this is happening in various ontologies. And I'll just finish off with, we're trying to robotize Foodon to systematize comprehensively at the very lowest level the foods that are eaten, what the anatomical part times the organism is, and then also create precomposed terms for qualities of food, raw, cooked, and other things that are commonly used. But this process also involves other new curators, Foodon curators. So Lauren Chan has been creating a list of food supplements that will be added to, and the effort is to link these to effects on rare disease, I think, other diseases. And this is a snapshot of the import into Foodon from crop dietary, the component dietary nutritional ontology, which is going to be handling all of our nutritional terms. So, and there's a whole food process
Actually,
modeling
we're a
group.
little over time, so I'm just going
Okay,
to stop you here
that's
if
it.
that's okay,
Yeah,
Damion. This is
that's
a
it.
lot to talk about. I know we've been doing this process meetings for the past 2 years together, so that's another whole big story
It's a
there.
whole other thing.
But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think Samantha had a really great question that kind of aligned with what I wanted to ask you a little bit. So, what lessons can we learn from the biontologies groups? And then if we're going forward, Fernanda is here too. So, thank you very much for joining in today. Feel free to jump in. So, as a community, she says, how can as a community make the ongoing ontologies, regardless of domain, cataloged for others so that we can encourage such repurposing efforts rather than creating new ontologies. And there is need for new ontologies, but there is also a need for communicating the need for the the new terms and everything. Sia asked a more detailed question. I encourage everyone to ask more questions in the document link I sent there. But what is your take on that? How do you see us going forward from here in terms of better collaborating, having tools to evolve ontologies faster? And
I like the idea myself that everybody's interested in developing tools is also sitting on a curation meeting, so that you can see how to harmonize your own project's thought with the thinking of other people and push you towards them. So that the same language, the same set of relations is being used and the same approach. And hopefully it's a collaborative and a constructive one that reaches the level of detail that you're interested in, but also accommodating the level of detail that other people need out of the same terms that you're sharing. So it's that common understanding that precludes, I think, good software and tool development.
right. No, I understand where you're coming from, but so I think my other question. I know we're over time, so I'm really trying to read the comments here. All right, so Anna Maria has another. There's going to be a workshop for harmonization of language and environmental health science that include very different fields, and I think it'll be great to see how this effort could be coordinated to create a larger community. So there are a lot of meetings for a lot of these efforts. So I feel like maybe it's the right time to create a platform for better mapping exchanges, better vocabulary updates, better, ontology ranking and rating, and yeah, kind of a community platform. What do you think? Do you think that's something that we should aim for?
I've gravitated to OBO Foundry precisely because it was the only method that I could maintain my sanity in this soup of multiple ontologies and vocabularies, relations especially. I was looking for one dialect to think within. I totally sympathize and see the priority for mapping, and this SSSOM project sounds great as one example of how to literally map. This whole mapping thing is in my book all about creating a view on data in a federated data system that a person, an individual human, and maybe machine can understand. It means converting, but that kind of relies on the expertise of other people to finally create a more comprehensive mapping. So yeah, I'm into that. In terms of the different community use, going beyond OBO Foundry and also coordinating beyond. So I'm interested in that. We're doing a bit of that in the Foodon in terms of processes, looking at SSN, the sensor ontology, and trying to map the processes over there. So it does, yeah, you have to get intimate with what's happening in other communities.
So I think it's about time that it's finally a pandemic made us realize we're all connected. So yeah, all right. So I'm gonna have to cut this short, but this is really interesting discussion. There's a document that's live out there. We're gonna move on to Cheryl. Thank you again so much for joining us, Damion.